think we'll get started. So welcome to everybody. This is the inaugural LinkedIn Live for ISMAP. And if you don't know ISMAP, it's the International Society of Medical Publication Professionals. And the folks you see here today are members of ISMAP. Tina and I actually volunteer for one of the committees, which is the Small Company and New Professional Outreach Committee. And along with ISMAP, whose mission really is to advance medical publications, to make sure that we're all within the community, advancing best practices, supporting each other. The Small Companies Committee is very much focused on thinking specifically about the needs of folks working within small teams, small companies. And we know that is not a minority interest. In fact, the majority of clinical trials and drugs in development are actually being supported by small to medium-sized companies, biotechs, devices companies. So we know that this is actually an area of interest for many, many people within the publications and medical communications community. So we have today a conversation. It's very much a conversation around publications leadership within small to mid-sized pharma. So we've sort of entitled this "The Juggle is Real," because we know that the challenges and the opportunities that exist for folks working within smaller teams, are very different from how we might traditionally think about big pharma, big teams, the way many conversations are set up. So we wanted to really focus on the majority perspective within small pharma, and this is obviously of interest to. I'm Claire Wadsworth. I come from the agency side. I'm co-founder of Amica Scientific, and we support both large pharma and small pharma clients. So we know that the standards and the quality and what we're delivering is the same, but actually the way we have to approach it is very different. So we thought this would be a really interesting conversation. So I'll include some information about ISMAP at the very end if you're not familiar with ISMAP. But this is very much a conversation, the kind of conversation that actually happens within ISMAP all the time. So the opportunity to bring together experts to share experience and insights. And in preparing for this session, it's been fascinating actually with Shella and Tina, who have very different backgrounds, but actually a lot of the insights are incredible and very powerful. So just to say that the information we're sharing today and the points of view are all our own. They're not representative of the companies or of ISMAP. And we're going to focus on three themes today: creative resourcing and making it work, cross-functional dynamics and influence, and strategic planning, while everyone around you is trying to focus on tactical delivery. And we'd also like to hear from you, so please post as many of your questions or comments in the chat as we go, and we will weave in as many of those as we can. So if I can hand over now, first of all, to Shella, just to give us a little bit of background and your perspective as we enter this conversation.
Thank you very much, Anne-Claire, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody on the call. It's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Shella Sheikh. I'm currently work for Kyowa Kirin, but I'm here because I have actually a pretty diverse background. So I have a PhD in chemistry and initially started out with publications in academic publishing, which was very, very different to anything that I've done since, but gave me a really solid grounding in things that I've used all the way along. But I moved from that into commercial publishing, which is also very, very different. We don't have the same kind of guidelines and strictures that we follow in the pharmaceutical side of the business, but I learned so much in that area, especially around how you communicate out to different audiences. And then I was very lucky because I moved across into the agency side and spent a large number of years on the agency side supporting the pharmaceutical industry before I jumped over the table and joined small pharma. And I started out in small pharma. It was very small, very specialty, and it just gave me the opportunity to do my own thing and learn so much. And actually, small pharma is probably where my interaction with ISMAP became more valid. That's where I did my CMPP, and it was useful to me in that early part of my career within pharma because it gave me a little bit of background and gravitas. It gave me, when I spoke to people, they understood that this was coming from a background that had some qualification behind it, but also it gave me something to refer to when I had some difficult questions or issues that I needed to ask. And in that scenario, it was me, myself, and I was the publications person. And in fact, there was no publication department before I joined. So I kind of did things as I wanted and made things up, but I always had something to fall back on to give me a little bit of support as I went through this. So I then moved from small pharma to medium pharma, then along to big pharma before moving back to what I refer to as kind of the medium-sized pharma space. And actually, in all of those areas, I learned so much. I think most of us learn every time we move from job to job, and you take those findings and those thoughts and those learnings with you. But one of the things that I learned most coming back to medium pharma in the last 5 or so years is that you need to change your mindset. You need to change the way you think. I had to learn to adapt and my own thoughts and feelings and the things that I had brought into my role into the actual environment around me. Coming from big pharma back to small or medium pharma, you kind of have the amazing sort of really solid policies and SOPs and structures and groups behind you. Everyone works the same way. Everyone does the same thing. When you say it has to be done this way, everyone's like, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be done that way? But when you move into these more specialized areas, you realize that it's not so easy. Those policies and SOPs don't always translate. You kind of have to almost go back to basics with certain people, and with other people, you have to sort of pull them along with you. So it was kind of a change in mindsets, a change in the way people were thinking. But for a lot of that to work, I had to change the way I thought. After about 18 months, a year, 18 months, I realized that I had stopped saying, but this is the right way to do things. This is how we have to do things. And instead, I was more saying, okay, these are the core principles, these are the core values. How can I make that work in this environment? How can I bring everyone along, make sure we're all doing the right things, following the right pathways, and giving the right guidance to everybody, but making it work in the environment that I am in. So it's very much it's very much around saying, taking all of those learnings, both the good and the bad, and adapting them for the role that you're in and adapting them for the environment that you're in. And sometimes if that means that you're going back to basics, that's okay. And sometimes if that means that you've got some really sort of messy, complex situations that you have to deal with, that's okay as well. You just have to treat it like a challenge. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop there. I could
No,
go on forever.
that's great. And I think it's probably one of the very first insights, actually, that's incredibly valuable for us on the agency side, which is that to be adaptable, because we go in knowing, the policies, the processes, the approaches that we work with, with big pharma clients, and then actually find that that's just not going to wash when we're working with clients who have to be more flexible and agile and pragmatic. So it's a great insight. So Tina, if I can hand over to you.
Of course. Also, hearty welcome to everybody around the globe. It's really nice to be here. My name is Tina Schlafly. I currently work at Corcept Therapeutics, and I'm a little newer to the publications field than Sheila. I've been in this field for about 9, 10 years now. And I should say my background's also a little different. I do not have the big pharma background. I don't have the agency experience. So I really grew up in this small pharma startup environment. My first foray into publications in the pharma world was in a real startup environment. So I feel like this sense of wearing many hats, or maybe wearing all the hats at a startup, that's totally familiar to me. And I'm sure a lot of folks on the line can relate to that as well. Over the course of my career, then I transitioned into more of the small pharma environment where there's a little bit more structure. But also a lot of still flexibility and creativity. I've worked in publication teams that were 2 people deep, then transitioned into a role where it was really just me, and then again built out a team that's a little bigger than that again. So I feel like I've seen a lot of that small, mid-sized pharma that I'm hoping a lot of folks on the line are familiar with, and some of those challenges that come with it. But the one thing I wanted to share with everybody was really what draws me into this. And I think this echoes some of what Shella said earlier on. I feel like even though, I mean, I say this not never having worked at big pharma, but in my mind, the small and mid-sized pharma work environment really is a challenging, a fluid, flexible environment. You learn something new every day. There's new challenges too, so it's not like we do the same thing every day in our role. So we have to be flexible. I think if you go in with a mindset you're enjoying this kind of work, I think that's a great place to be. I also love that we can be really close to our stakeholders. Publications is always cross-functional, but I think in those smaller companies where lots of people wear different hats, and we all really need to come together and pull together to make all those cross-functional projects work. I think this is a unique opportunity for us to be really, really close, to get to know our stakeholders very well. They know us, we know them, we know for what projects we can rely on them, how we can bring them into the publications process to make our own lives easier and also their lives easier, right? And our work makes a really tangible impact, right? We're not another cog in the wheel. We're usually not in a team of 50 and everybody just does their thing and goes home at the end of the day. But there's a lot of reward in what we do too. And I think we get a lot of visibility for our work as well, which is something that I really enjoy. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about just what I've seen in terms of how companies are different, right? Small pharma companies, I feel like they develop in different ways. So I've worked in companies where leadership came out of academia. So some of the challenges that we face are based on this academic mindset and maybe not as much familiarity or at that point with the industry norms. Why do we have to do publications slightly differently? I mean, some of us may have worked in academia ourselves and we're more used to, oh, here's the person who brought in the money for this research project. They might not have done hands-on work, but of course they're the senior author, right? But in industry, again, that's not how we think. That's not how ICMJE guidelines work or good publication practice works. So there's a lot of education. I think understanding where stakeholders come from and what their background is helps us really address those and fill that educational gap in a more effective way. And on the other hand, sometimes these smaller companies are founded by people who were leaders in big pharma initially. And to Shella's point earlier, there's a big machinery behind them. There's lots of SOPs. Everybody knows exactly how publications work. But now you're in a much smaller environment, and maybe the expectation is that everything still works the same way. But now you're an N of one, maybe an N of two team. So there's a different educational need. So I think just having that in mind and really understanding where folks are coming from to me has been really beneficial in building out some of those teams and overcoming some of those challenges. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think again, that's a really interesting perspective, actually, the fact that, you're having to educate people all the time, wherever they come from, about this. And Shella mentioned before about, the principles and the values stay the same, even if the way things need to be delivered. And I think another thing that just came through from that, which just strikes me very strongly, actually, as we talk to people, that people choose, very often to go into the small and mid-sized companies because of the opportunities and the scope and the ability to influence and connect with stakeholders that we'll touch on a little bit later. But I think if we go to the first theme, Shella, and it's one that we talked about beforehand about the sort of the opportunity and the need for creativity when it comes to thinking about the resourcing approaches, which, if you're going in there and it's you and you don't have those big teams to fall back on, you're pulling in on different resources, including sometimes agencies. Sometimes you can't afford to bring the agencies in. Sometimes you're having to rely on colleagues and whatnot. So I think just your perspective on that, really, the creativity mindset and the things that are most effective, those principles and the values that do mean that things can get done.
Yeah, And it's really interesting because I will just echo what Tina said there. The reason we all come back to mid-pharma is to be able to influence that, being able to influence, being close to not just the science, but the people and the way things done are super important. But creative resourcing, creative publications is all about being, in my opinion, is all about being agile. It's about really digging in and understanding what the priorities are at the different levels, because you know what, the priorities that your CEO has is going to be so different to the priorities that the MSL is going to have. But you need to understand all of them, and you need to be, I think, close to, and you can be close to them in small mid pharma. That's the beauty of it, is that you can actually reach out in some organizations and be able to talk to the CEOs or to the your chief scientific officer. And actually, I've been in roles where my chief scientific officer is my main pubs person, because they're the ones that I'm dealing with. But you have to understand those priorities. You have to understand what is really important to them. And then you have to think outside the box. You have to kind of be creative in the way you do things. As I said, focusing on those core values and making sure that things are done right, that we're being transparent, that we're doing all the right steps, that ethically, that we're making sure that our companies are doing the right thing. But you think outside the box. You have to step outside and sort of say, what can I do to bring this along? So I was thinking about this when we've talked about it, and I thought, what example can I give that will do? And the one that came to mind is actually from quite a while back. And it was, I was working in, and I'm going to do it in quotation marks, a very old therapy area. It's a very tired therapy area. There's like hundreds of generic things out there for it, but we had something new. And there's only so much that we could do to educate. We can't do yet another clinical study paper on this because it's not saying anything different to what's already out there, but it's just, we still need to educate. We still need to get the information out there to the right people in the right way. And I remember talking with some of my colleagues, and again, it was multifunctional. I was talking to the CSO, I was talking to the head of the product, I was talking to someone down in the research lab who was doing the work and trying to understand what was happening. But what we ended up on was this piece that was coming out of some insights work that was happening. This was a therapy area that was nurse practitioner led. And, they had a KOL who was a nurse practitioner who was kind of working with patients, trying to understand some of the insights and what they meant. And when she started talking about this piece of work that she was doing, in my mind, it was like, we can use that. Why can't we use that? Oh, we can't use that because does that kind of sit in more a marketing area? Is that more this? Could it be medical? And because of being in that small environment, being close enough to the people to actually influence and talk to them, I was able to reach out quite quickly and say, don't go any further on that yet. Can we talk? Can you tell me what this is about? Can we expand this and maybe let medical run with it and do something with it? So you still get your insights, you still do those patient discussions, you still talk to those marketing panels to get that feedback, but let us use it in a different way and get some publications out of it so that we can get that message out to the right people in a different way. And that's what we did. Long story short, that is exactly what we did. We kind of had a look at it. We went back and actually looked at the guidelines, not just for publications, but actually went back and looked at some of the very, very stringent guidelines that are out for doing marketing studies, for doing other types of studies, and saying, you know what, as long as we do this, as long as we follow these rules, we put this in place, we put this ethics piece in place, we can work with this, we can take this. Yeah. And that's what we did. And for me, it was a great experience because I got to listen in on patients giving some really forthright feedback on something that I never would have been able to do. And I've never been able to do since in any of my other roles. But it helped us generate some really, really powerful insights, which we then published. And that was supporting not just our HCPs who were working in this very tired area, but also working, supporting our patients as well, because it was being nurse practitioner led. So the tone, the language, the whole style of it was very different. So to me, that's a good example of it. It's just taking those opportunities, making you sure you understand what the networks are, who the people are, and then tapping into them to maximize that resource.
And that is a much more sort of strategic mindset that is, and often an opportunity to do, and also much more customer centric, audience centric mindset, where I think, when in big companies where it's often siloed, that is always a challenge. Whereas in a smaller organization, you're all thinking about that and talking about that together. So that's fantastic. And then, so Tina, that, you've obviously been sort of from an N of one and building and growing your team and thinking about that and having to get creative about rationalizing for new headcount and bringing people in and thinking, what's the sort of learnings there from you in terms of how you leverage resources around you?
Yeah, so I feel like a lot comes back to this: communicate and use all the resources that you have, right? To Shella's point, it's a small company, so you get to talk to all the different folks and you get to learn what their strengths are. So sometimes when you are working with a team and you don't have the bandwidth to write all the manuscripts yourself, talk to your key stakeholders, talk to your subject matter experts. A lot of them might be happy to do more hands-on writing, and you can educate them on what the proper approach is to bringing in authors, at what stage that would have to happen, and how the process works, but lean on them to do the part that they're willing to do. Overall, I feel like my role in having those conversations often feels a little bit like a salesperson approach, right? I always approach these conversations with the mindset of what's in it for them. We're not doing publication processes, publication planning just for us as a pubs team. We're doing it for the company as a whole. So there's a strategy that we all work towards that supports the company broadly, but also to make sure that not only our resources are well aligned and assigned, but also everybody else's, right? So I often have those conversations around, hey, we want to plan out publications. If we do everything out of this study right now, we're going to be strapped. Biostats is going to be very, very busy doing all the analysis we want. The clinical team's going to be super busy. Everybody who's a reviewer is going to do it all at once. Is that going to serve a purpose, or does it make more sense both from a strategic point of getting the message out in bite-sized chunks and that build on each other, but also from a resourcing standpoint so that all of our teams together can assign their resources more strategically? So I think that's been really helpful to me.
That's great. And I think what you both just said on that sort of theme, particularly just, noting that a negotiator, a strategist, a salesperson, a diplomat, influencing, all of these sort of personal skills are extremely important. They're called softer skills, but they're actually incredibly powerful that you have to have when you're in, a smaller team. So the other sort of thinking about the other theme, and just as you're working cross-functionally, that Shella, just the education piece we touched on before, but balancing that without becoming the publication police, right? So the fact that you have to, uphold the principles and the values. Any sort of thoughts there of how to kind of make that a less contentious than it could be?
Well, I'm going to start with saying sometimes you have to be the publication police, and I'm not going to make excuses for it. I'm sure Tina and I are the same. I sometimes there are days, there are weeks when I feel like all I'm saying is no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. No, we cannot, definitely not do that. And that's part of our role, so we have to do it. But it's about education. It's about going back and making sure people understand the why. Sometimes the no is really, really basic, and it's like, it's absolutely totally against any principle or that we can go, so no, you can't do that. Full stop, that's it. But if you don't have the buy-in from your stakeholders, if you don't have people around you who understand and support that, you just saying no means nothing. So it's about education. It's about reaching out to the right people. It's about going back to basics, I think, like I said at the beginning, and then educate, and then rinse and repeat. You just do it over and over and over again in different ways. You try to not make it as boring as that sounds, but it is about educate, and it's about educating the right people. When you have a cross-functional team and you look at who's involved in publications in your cross-functional team, in small mid-pharma companies, quite often it isn't just the people who are involved in the studies. Yes, you've got your biostats, yes, you've got your others, but you're maybe also talking to people who are based in a different country, in a different, when you're working a global product, from a different language or a different background, where things are done very, very differently. I mean, even those of us who've worked in EMEA alone, that is so many different countries, and every single country does things a different way. So it's kind of picking up on those pieces, and also just making sure that you have the right advocates. Talk to your compliance and legal people. And I know for most of us, we're like, oh my God, compliance again. I mean, that usually kills any publication discussion. But they're the ones sometimes that you really have to educate, because if they are going out there and giving that compliance line to your cross-functional colleagues in different countries, in different regions, in different areas, then they need to understand what some of that GPP is and why we have to do things a certain way. Because if they've turned around and said, based on their understanding of their country, based on their understanding of their region and whatever rules that they're following, that seems okay to me, and they've said yes to them, your cross-functional colleague's going to go ahead and do that, not realizing that actually from a publications perspective, from our perspective, it's not the right way to do something. So I think I'm going to say it is a balancing act. It's about, as I said, networking, communicating with the right people. Sometimes not even the right people, might be the wrong people. Maybe the people you really need to educate are your commercial colleagues or your marketing colleagues, but it's getting them on board, because once they have a little bit of an understanding of how you work, and if they at the very least understand that we are the publication police, so before you do something, come and talk to us. Even that is clear, but it's also a win. If I can get my sort of marketing commercial colleagues to come to me first before it's become a mess that we need to deal with, that's a win in my book.
Yeah, and I think that, so Tina, like that in terms of that, the blurring, across roles, and then accountabilities, like of who's responsible for what, and in tight timelines, everyone's stretched, everyone's like focused on just getting it done. How do you, manage that and manage the expectations of some of the teams who just don't, who might think getting a publication done is just admin, right? That there's, how do you manage that?
Yeah, so I think there's a bunch of different things that I want to pick up on in your question, AC. So let's start there. That publication police term really resonates with me, and I totally agree with Sheila. Sometimes we need to be the publication police, and the way I sometimes address it, if folks are like, oh my gosh, why do we have to do this? Well, it's fine. You can blame me. It's okay. This is the publication rule. It's not your fault. It's mine. It's okay, right? This is our job. We are here to educate everybody. So that's fine. Just handing off that responsibility to us where it belongs in some sense. But then on these like blurring of lines, and I think everybody has probably seen this, and it's one of the more challenging parts of our jobs. It's like keeping that line between marketing, commercial functions, and publications work. I think again, it's a matter of communicating and knowing where folks are coming from, right? Is it, say a person in commercial marketing really wants to review your publication. To me, it's again a matter of figuring out, why do they feel that way, right? Is it because they used to be in a role previously where they had that kind of access, and now that their role may have transitioned, it's not appropriate anymore? In a small company, maybe they are wearing multiple hats, right? And sometimes they are in a development role, and sometimes they're in a commercial role. So then again, it's a matter of bringing that to their awareness, making sure they understand that maybe they're wearing multiple hats, and in some of their roles they can, and in other roles they cannot have access to this kind of information. So understanding the background, and that gives you a chance to really educate folks and make them understand where you're coming from. I feel like a lot of our stakeholders that we work with on a day-to-day basis, there's working scientists or they are scientists as a background, right? So I feel like as long as you have some logic, it's not just a rule that we impose, but there's some logic to it and a reason to why we're doing things. I feel like that has often helped me in those conversations. Give them the why, and they will have an easier time following your lead. And then the other thing I think that we need to keep in mind, especially in those interactions with marketing and commercial, is yes, there is a line, but some information exchange is possible within a compliant framework, right? I mean, of course, we want to know what questions come up in a field time and time again so we can build a publication plan that addresses that. So that's information that can be exchanged in my mind. We can let folks know what publications are coming out at what time so they can plan ahead for that. But that doesn't mean that they have hands-on access to the actual publications on a like tactical level. So I think setting that framework and letting folks know that there is some level of crosstalk, but that might not be the hands-on approach that they might want to see. I think just giving them the full picture is going to help them and help us do our job better.
Yeah, and I think that sort of leads really into the third theme, where we've talked about the balance really of strategic and tactical planning. And so, you know, the power of publication, well done, well delivered, you know, and versus people just wanting to get stuff done, right? And just not thinking and not understanding the kind of the compliance needs. So, Shella, you know, you've obviously seen this from all sides, but the shift from tactical to more of a, you know, support function to more of a strategic contributor within the organization. How long does that take? Like, is that the kind of thing that, you know, you are building up over time? Is that about finding the right sort of advocates within the organization? What kind of things can help that shift?
So I think it's a mixture of all of those. Definitely, it's about finding the right advocates, but actually, I think it also depends on where you are in the life cycle of whatever product or publication plan that you're working on. And it's about showing the value of that publication. It's about understanding that it has, you know, the publication as a tactic isn't that it has an impact on your strategy. If you do this now, you are missing an opportunity to do that. And sometimes different teams, especially when they're cross-functional teams, they can't see beyond their space. You know, if you've got a regional team who are focusing on their regional congress activities, that's where they meet their HCPs, that's where they have most of their interactions. They want to have data there. Of course they do. So they can't see beyond that. So it's kind of like being able to say to them, okay, yes, we understand the value of this. We understand this is important, but let us help you expand on that. Let us help you double that so that you don't just have an opportunity to talk to them here, but actually you can take that same piece here, here, and here. So it's about the impact of that publication on your strategy. And then it's about the fact that that publication, you twist it on its head and say, well, that's publication is also needed for your strategy. You know, it's like, on the one hand, it's just to get that data out there, and that's part of your strategic need. But on the other hand, you actually need it for things like your value dossiers, or if you're doing discussions with the EMA or with the FDA, you need that. And again, it comes down to communication, making sure you know where all those touch points are. It's like, you know, talk to your leads. If you've got a cross-functional team that includes regulatory, that includes development, talk to them and say, what deadlines are you working to? What is it that you need to get out there and why? And then let us take that back and feed that into a plan. And then you're saying to them also, it's about evidence. So it's impact, it's about value, and it's about evidence. The evidence that this publication is giving is going to kind of feed into the wider amount of data that you have and that you need to do. So you have to kind of demonstrate that value. A lot of teams, especially in smaller mid-sized companies, you get very focused on that one piece that you're working on. And part of our roles as pubs leads is to kind of make them take a step back and see that bigger picture. And they don't always see it. but if I will just say, if you're working on, for example, a phase 2 project, and you're already talking to them about your phase 3 and beyond activities from a publications perspective, do it then. Try and capture it at the right place, because until that point, they're not thinking together. Even though they have a cross-functional team, they're not necessarily working like a cross-functional team. So you kind of almost have to force them to do that and say, hey, John over there, you're doing a really good piece, but actually that piece is really, really important to Sarah over there, who is working with the HCPs in a totally different direction. So can I bring you together to get you to talk about what's important about this? And then suddenly it clicks. They're like, oh, so if I wait for that, that will help me with that. And you kind of have to show them that sometimes, and it's not easy. But when you can show them that, and I think Tina mentioned something about the pitfalls and kind of the upticks. When we can show them the evidence that this works, they kind of come on board with it, and then they become your advocates, and then they will stand up when the next time in a meeting you turn around and say, whoa, hold on a second, can you maybe not do that yet? They'll be like, no, I agree. Let's pause on that.
And I think, Tina, from the perspective of and Charlotte touched on that there about the importance of narrative and timing, and are there ways to get people to kind of understand that so that they will be more open?
I think so. So you'll often hear me talk about the story of our compounds or the story of our products, right? So whenever I approach our cross-functional teams, again, with this mindset that they want to understand the why, just talking to them, hey, we need to tell the full story about this. What's the point in putting out, say, phase 2 data in a vacuum when we haven't communicated on the mechanism yet? Because that study there might still be work ongoing that's going to be done like 4 weeks from now. How about we do this first? And then I'm like, oh yeah, no, probably that's going to make more sense. So I think, to Charlotte's point, there's a lot of just education and reminding folks. I also want to acknowledge something that's very real to me just in our daily practice. I totally agree with everything Sheila said, and the strategy is such an important part of our jobs. But in our day-to-day, it's really hard to carve out time to focus on that sometimes, because we are in this, if we are a small team or just a single publications person, there's a lot of things that are just thrown at us and just like, do this, we need to get into this conference and need to do this, and just breaking out of this constant influx of or reactive mode, right? That's been really a challenge in my experience, and I'm sure others are faced with the same thing. So yes, strategy is an important part. We need to find ways of getting there, but it's not an easy thing. I want to acknowledge that so folks feel heard if they've experienced something like that. And yeah, if I want to kind of just throw in 2 or 3 very hopefully tangible things that have helped me just get that into folks' minds a little bit. One thing that's worked really well for me is like a concept sheet. Ask your stakeholders when they start out with a publication to fill out a quick and easy questionnaire, but that asks strategic questions. Don't just ask them what the data is and when the data is available, but ask them, why do you want to go to this conference? Why is this audience the right audience? Why do you think this is the right time? And by doing that, you'll get it ingrained in everybody's minds to think a little more strategic. On the other hand, make your publication plan easily accessible, put it somewhere everybody can see, just again, to get them used to that approach, and that it's there, that it's a living document that they should be thinking about. And then again, something as easy as just sending regular publication updates. I'm sure a lot of folks are doing this. Sneak in a couple of strategic tidbits, right? We went to Congress X to achieve Y. This is how it aligns with our strategy, and it was a huge success. Just remind them throughout the process. It's great. It's a pat on our own back. We get to show the great work that we've done, and it just reinforces this strategic thinking across the team. And I think hopefully in practice that's going to help folks.
Yeah, that's great. And that's getting a lot of thumbs up and interaction from the audience there, because I think that sort of so we'll be rounding off in a second just with a couple of slides just to give some information about ISMAP, because obviously that provides some resources there. But just Shella, any other sort of thoughts to add to the kind of the hints and tips of things that can, make a difference, that, alongside those great ideas there around the concept sheet?
I love the idea of the concept sheet. I think that works super well. I've done that with and that works really well. But actually, I think I take it to the other extreme as well and say, especially in small mid pharma, we need to make sure that our colleagues truly see what we do. I mean, we have data, it goes to a conference, maybe 10% of the team or the company will be seeing that. What about the rest of the company? They are always interested in knowing what's out there. So if it's possible, consider ways that you can share it with the rest of the organization. Is there space on a wall somewhere that you can persuade someone, your friendly CSO or ops person, hey, could you pay for a frame that we could just put up there? Bring the poster back with you, stick it in a frame. So that people can see them, share it with other team members, and also share some of that credit, because none of this work is done in silo. It really isn't. So even if the authors on the manuscripts, on the papers, or on the or presentations, etc., are just the key people involved, they're not the only ones involved. Try and build that goodwill so people understand and acknowledge everybody's work. And sometimes the way to do that is to show it off. And it is about showing it off. And that's not a reflection on Tina and I as the sort of pubs lead. That's a reflection on that wider team. Give them something to feel proud of. Yeah. And then they will then help you the next time you say, hey, I really want to do this difficult publication in a really, really short time frame. And can we do it in a week instead of 3 weeks? And they'll be like, oh, actually, I can see the value of it.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. And I think that speaks to what actually you've talked about throughout the whole sort of last 40 minutes, really, is around the engagement, the need to engage, the need to understand, to listen. This is not about the processes and the procedures and the way you do things technically are all obviously very important, but actually what you bring as an individual in terms of being able to influence and negotiate and connect is really powerful. So just thank you so much for that. And I just wanted to share here, because I think we're all members of the ISMAP community, and the opportunity to just for everyone here, if you're not familiar with ISMAP, it's a not-for-profit member-led organization. And
I think you might be sharing the wrong screen.
I'm sorry. Here we go. Stop share there. Thank you.
Sure thing.
I'm just going to share this here now. So I want this one. Is that right? Are we good? Yes. Okay. So ISMAP, not for profit, and 2,600 members, and it really is a fantastic opportunity to connect with peers. There are many sort of different channels, webinars, resources available online. So if you visit the ISMAP website, you can get access to all of that. There's currently a discount ongoing. So if you go and have a look, if you've either new to ISMAP or haven't been a member in the past 3 years, the code are there that you can take a look at. And then also, this is superb opportunity for people, if you are able to get to it, to Boston in November, which is very much focused on sessions that really are tailored to folks working within smaller teams. So registration will open later this month. So continue to follow ISMAP on LinkedIn and X and Blue Sky, I think. And if you have any questions, please just connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd be very happy to answer anything, and we will be following up hopefully after the session. But we are at our 45 minutes. This was the first time we have done that. I would just want to say thank you so much to Shella and Tina and Jess, who's been managing things in the background. So just thank you to everybody who's joined in. That was a fantastic turnout for our first session. We're very pleased, and we shall look forward to seeing you at the next LinkedIn Live. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.